let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in the importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am co-host Andrew Sullivan. Unfortunately, I am, and very sadly, I am not joined by Mr. Jonny Rickard today. Jonny is busy doing whatever things Jonny's got going on. I don't know, he just sent me a message about 45 minutes ago and said, I can't join, can you cover the stream by yourself? And I'm like, well, yeah, Jonny, you do it for me all the time, so of course. So that being said, I'm not at all worried about it. I've got two phenomenal folks joining me here today on a topic that I think is really, really exciting. I work with this team a lot separately in my normal, 9 to 5 day job. So I love you guys, and it's always a joy to work with you. So I'm looking forward to today's topic and being able to learn more about what you'll do, learn more about the projects that you've got going on, and then specifically, today's topic is the Migration Toolkit for virtualization and the user experience and the things that we have learned and are implementing or have implemented inside of that particular tool. So with that being said, I will ask Peter and then Margot to introduce yourselves, and then we can go from there.
Hey, yeah. So I'm Peter Kreuzer. I'm the OpenShift UX design team lead, principal designer here at Red Hat. Pretty much our team is focused on all things OpenShift, including virtualization and Migration Toolkit for virtualization. It's good to be back. Pass it off to you, Margot.
Hi, everyone. I'm Margot. I'm a senior UX designer on the OpenShift Vert team, and I've been focusing on MTV and designing all things MTV. So I'm excited to show you all what we've been working on.
Yeah, very cool. And like I said, I know I've been working with you all for a while on the background on things, and I know these days you all spend a lot of time with OpenShift virtualization and sort of related things. I know we have a separate thing. I actually have it up in a tab over here in the window. You just can't see it, around like storage and networking and all this other stuff. So y'all extend well beyond just OpenShift virtualization and into the overall experience. And before we, or maybe once we get started, I kind of want to ask, Peter, I know you were planning to do an introduction, but I'm always curious about how we define user experience. What does that look like and what does that mean? So I'll re-ask you that question here in just a moment. So that being said, so for everybody who has joined us today, thank you for joining. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions. Anything OpenShift related, we will do our best to find, to answer those questions. And if we don't know the answer, we'll do our best to find those answers. So if you are watching us live, feel free to chat in whatever platform you're watching us on. They get all aggregated and then rebroadcast across the various platforms. So please don't hesitate to use that. If you are listening to us or you are not watching us live, you can also reach out via email. So my email address is on the screen here. It's sully@redhat.com, SULLY. Or of course, you can send Jonny an email, JONNY@redhat.com. Sometimes he's the more friendly looking of us, I guess. Maybe he's got a bigger beard than me these days. So although Peter takes that award clearly. Anyways, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We would love to hear from you, and we will do our best to answer those questions. I know I've got one in my inbox right now that I need to respond to, but I'm still digging out from PTO purgatory on the email front. So with that being said, let's talk about today's topic. So as I said, literally a minute ago, one of the things that I'm always curious about is a lot of times, and I make this mistake as well, we talk about things in the UI, the user interface, and what we really mean is the UX, the user experience, and how do we improve that overall thing? Because UI is a part of UX, but it's only one, I don't know if it's a major or minor part, but it's only one part of that overall thing. So I'll quit rambling and I'll hand it over to you, Peter.
Yeah, you set that up quite well. I guess I'd say it's not uncommon for when people hear UX, they often think about the user interface, making sure it's appealing looking. It should be intuitive. That's certainly a large part of our job. Like you could simplify to like where do the buttons go. But I guess I'd say like that's really just like one facet of our job. Honestly, understanding user experience and making sure that we have good user experience. A lot of times what it ends up being is understanding the gaps between solutions that we have. So, I mean, we have many different products here at Red Hat. We recognize that. They accomplish different functions, but what we're trying to make sure that they do for you as users is that they are easy to use moving between them. The functions that they accomplish are what you need to do. Honestly, and we do that by talking to y'all, the customers, the users, and understanding what your pain points are when using our products, so that we can better bridge those gaps and fill those needs. Certainly, sometimes that is putting things in the UI, rearranging things, making sure things are intuitive. But I'll say that our focus goes into CLIs as well. We know a lot of functions are accomplished via CLI, so we take a look at those interfaces. Maybe someday we'll get into API design. We'd love to touch on that too. Like that's all, we all consider that part of the user experience. If it's something that you're doing with our products, it's part of user experience. So really that's all the breadth of what our team covers.
Yeah, I know y'all were at Red Hat Summit. You had a little table in the OpenShift booth, and I used to make the joke because I had a bunch of customer briefing center meetings, and I would run into people out on the expo floor in sessions and labs and stuff like that. I was always sending folks to you, and I'm like, they're masochists. Like they just love to hear all of the things that you hate. Like so, just go and tell them about all the things that are difficult or challenging or that you don't like or that make life miserable. Like y'all seem to thrive on that type of thing. But I want to point out, and I hope that today's session is one where we can highlight just the massive improvements that also come out of that, right? We can't get better without that feedback. And so, while yes, it sometimes maybe feels a little thankless or otherwise masochistic. I'll use that word again. It is really, really important. And I can't, me personally, having been a part of OpenShift virtualization all this for a long time, OpenShift for even longer, like I can't thank you all enough. So.
Well, we appreciate that. Yeah, for sure.
So with that being said, let's talk about Migration Toolkit for virtualization. So we've talked about OpenShift virtualization a number of times here on the stream, right? OpenShift virtualization is Red Hat bringing virtual machines as first-class native citizens directly into OpenShift alongside containers. And I think what's really interesting here is that this is blending two worlds that historically have been pretty separate, right? Kubernetes admins, OpenShift admins, and OpenShift users tend to be really, like you just said a moment ago, Peter, they're really CLI centric, they're really API centric. Like, yes, we have this beautiful, user interface for OpenShift, but it was really focused on the container side of things. And now we're bringing in virtual machines. And virtual machines have a whole new set of requirements. And virtual machine administrators have a whole different set of, or virtualization administrators have a whole different set of expectations. So I know that has been, I'm going to use the word challenging for you all in just the sheer amount of feedback and other things that you have learned and continue to work on. Dwayne, I see your question here. So use case for MicroVMs, or is that not a thing? So MicroVMs are, I think something like Firecracker, et cetera, is what I think that's referring to. And effectively what that does, and maybe I'm mixing up sandbox containers and MicroVMs, but effectively what it does is it uses the kernel and KVM in the case of OpenShift to create basically a very small VM that is a completely separate and isolated kernel. So this is really important for security reasons in particular, right? I want to have a wholly isolated container instance that's running, that is then running only that container image, rather than a full-size virtual machine, which is like a whole nother operating system and all of that. So compare that with a more traditional container, right? It is a shared kernel model that uses kernel features, C groups, et cetera, in order to provide that isolation. So MicroVMs create a full virtualized container. It's fully isolated, but it only runs that kernel and then the container instance inside of there. That's the big difference from what I understand. And we should probably bring security folks back on at some point. So Peter, go ahead. I think you were gonna talk about virtualization.
Yeah. So that gives a great setup for what we're going to focus on today, which is really the Migration Toolkit for virtualization. Probably throughout this call, we'll refer to it as MTV, which is kind of an endearing acronym. But basically what that tool does is it's an operator that you can install on your OpenShift cluster running OpenShift virtualization to then migrate VMs from some other hypervisor, any hypervisor you have, including Rev, into the OpenShift cluster that you want to land them on. You can do it in a warm way or a cold way, whether you need to stop the VM or not. But really, it's a way of mass moving your VMs into that OpenShift cluster that you intend to run them on. What we really want to start with today is I'm going to go ahead and share the existing UI, basically, just so we can talk through what that looks like. Let me one moment here. All right. So yeah, what we're looking at here, I have an OpenShift cluster. I'll point out that it's running OpenShift 417. But if we go take a look, we'll see in the operators list that both OpenShift virtualization and the Migration Toolkit for virtualization are installed. They're already installed in this cluster just because I didn't want to use time doing that. But once you've installed those, you'll see it enables two things in the left nav. There's this virtualization nav section, which is all of the OpenShift virtualization things. But then there's also this migration section, which is more of the MTV items. So if we take a look at that, I'll go to the overview page for MTV. This is one of the areas that we're going to touch on. Margot's going to touch on later in this call and kind of show some of the improvements we made. But this is the existing version that's there today. Basically, it gives you a little background into what MTV is, a little information about the operator and the pods that it's running. There's this table that gives you information about the most recent migrations that have been run, as well as some settings. You have access to the YAML of the operator, I believe, and then also some metrics. So this accomplishes a couple of things that orients you in the tool, but it did feel like there was some room for opportunity here. So Margot is going to touch on that in a little bit. But looking at what the functions that MTV has is there's a couple of things in the left nav here. There's providers, plans, and then storage maps and network maps. Providers are essentially where you want to move the VMs from and the destination you want to move them to. So in this case, we have a couple in here already. There's one from VMware, and there's one that I think represents this host cluster.
Yep.
I'll get plans and go over to storage maps. So this is how you would map your storage between where you're moving it from and to. And then we also have network maps, which are something similar. Migration plans are sort of the thing that brings all of that together. So this is where you would choose. I'll just go ahead and create one. So we have this wizard today. This is another item that Margot will touch on shortly as to how we've updated it. But basically what this does is this is where you could choose where you want to move your VMs from. So in this case, I'll just choose VMware. It lists out all the VMs that exist on that VMware instance today. So you can pick a couple of those. And so I'll point out this wizard is pretty, I guess I'd say, bare bones today. It lets you choose where you want them from, choose the VMs. There's not a ton of, I guess I'd say, like in-product learning or in-product assistance in the form of tooltips, that type of thing. So that's something that Margot will touch on that we're trying to improve on. There's also information about each of the VMs. So that's something that we're taking a look at as far as like how you could triage that. But getting into the last step, this is sort of where you would then name this plan so that this individual plan that represents those VMs moving from that destination to the new source, you would give that a name. You can choose the target provider, that type of thing, as well as map the network and storage. And so this is sort of, I guess I'm going through quickly, this two-step wizard of like how you would do this today. I mentioned a couple gaps of like the learning. Maybe the order of things might be not instantly intuitive as far as that you have to name the thing on the last step, which maybe wouldn't be what everybody expected. But still is usable in its current state, but we saw some room for opportunity here. I guess I'd say like overarchingly, looking at that overview page, looking at the wizard, we knew that there was room for improvement. So we ran some research talking to internal Red Hatters that use this tool for their day-to-day jobs, pretty often executing large-scale migrations. Also talking to customers that have interacted with it today, and basically aggregated all that feedback and summarized it into a few pain points. I've touched on them. Many of these folks had trouble learning the tool, just in the sense that there wasn't a ton of in-product help. We certainly have documentation, but that requires you to go to docs and then read it. So that seemed like one opportunity we want to focus on. Also, choosing VMs. You saw there was a table there where I could choose which VMs I wanted to migrate, but there seems like there's more opportunity to sort of group those, give you more information about what issues might exist if you migrate them. So that was another area that we focused on. I won't run a plan now, but once you run a plan, we had feedback on the amount of monitoring you get or the amount of information you're getting while the thing is actually migrating. Opportunity for like more granular feedback, or if something fails, more specific feedback on why it failed or what failed. So we're going to focus on that. And then also we just got like a handful of, I guess, what I would call UI bugs, just small things that we could probably tweak and fix, small things that didn't require a ton of lift on our end. But honestly, if you fix 10 of them, it really improves the overall UX. So I guess I'd say overarchingly, that's sort of the existing interface today and some of the pain points that we saw. So Margot's going to show some screens where we updated these flows, which we then went back and got feedback from those same users and got basically better outtake of what their opinion was of them. But I guess I'll pause for. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to point out, Peter, that there is nothing wrong with this interface, and it is pretty typical of Red Hat interfaces. One, we use all the same design language, and now the framework just completely escaped my mind. Patternfly, thank you. We just updated to the new Patternfly 6, I think, with OpenShift 4.19. So we use kind of all of the same design language, so they all look the same. But Red Hat, because we're a company of engineers, we tend to think like and present things with the assumption that everyone else is an engineer. And so it's very kind of matter of fact and straightforward. And Peter, I know you've heard me say many times before, of like we force people to care about implementation details, because as engineers, that's what we think about and that's what we care about. And so like one of the examples here with MTV is like the storage maps and network maps. Like, do I, as the user, like, do I want to care about those objects? Like, maybe, but not all of the time. And maybe it's not my first choice. And like, in the example you showed there, like I think you'd already created the storage maps and the network maps. And so they were just populated there, as opposed to have to going through, and I think in this version, it was like you had to pre-create those things before you could actually use them and like all this other stuff. And so like, we force people to kind of go through extra hoops that affect that overall user experience. And so I know that this has been substantially improved, and so I hope I'm setting up Margot for to showcase a lot of the great work that she did here, because like, it is one of those really great things of like, as a user, I just want to use the system. I don't want to have to think about like, what is this YAML object or what is this CRD, and I need to create this thing and it needs to have these fields and stuff like that. And again, I'm alluding to conversations that we have behind the scenes all of the time, but it's like, please don't make me care about implementation details that only happen once, or that aren't kind of they're secondary, if you will, right? It doesn't matter if I have to do 1, 2, 3, 4. If the user experience can just get me from 1 to 4, when 2 and 3 are sort of arbitrary steps that only the system cares about. Anyways.
That's a perfect summary of like what we started with, as far as like the definition of user experience, or at least the user experience that we focus on, like getting you from 1 to 4, like that is the overarching goal. So let's figure out how to get you there the soonest, whether it uses a UI or if we could just remove the UI altogether and you don't have to worry about it, that might be the best outcome. So thanks for saying that, Sully.
Yeah. Okay. I'll stop rambling, so that way we can look at the great work of Margot.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing here and maybe I'll turn it over to you, Margot.
Sounds good. Thanks, Peter. So I will be essentially demoing all the designs that we've been working on, and it's me and my colleague Ethan Kim, who's done some amazing work as well. Unfortunately, he could not join us today, but just wanted to give credit to him as well. So I will be demoing 3 different things. So the first one will be the Create Migration Plan Wizard update. The second will be updates to the overview page, which Peter was showing earlier, and then also some monitoring improvements. Once you run your migration plan, what does that look like? How do you evaluate how your VMs have migrated? So let me set that up. All right, so the first thing is the create migration plan. So if you were to go to the migration plans page, you would see a list of all your migrations. And if you want to create a new migration plan, you would click this create plan button, and it would open up this new wizard, which is a full page wizard. The first thing to point out is that there are a few more steps to it. So we really wanted to surface more options so that people were fully aware of what they could do with their migration plans. We've also reordered some of the steps to be more in tune with what somebody would expect. And so the first step is this general setup information. So you'd name your plan, and then you'd select your source and target providers. So I'm just going to walk through this as if I was to create a plan. And I just want to point out that these are mocks. So forgive me if it's not the full experience. Okay, so the first thing is I would name a plan. Let's call it test plan. I would then have the plan project. By default, it would create this plan in OpenShift MTV's project. And then you would select your source provider. In this case, we're just going to say VMware. So that's where you want to migrate from, and then target provider where you want to migrate to. And then you'd specify what project you want those VMs to migrate to as well. I do want to point out as well that we added more things like tooltips where you can see more information about what each field means, which is some feedback that we gotten around. Sometimes there's confusion around the details of these. So we wanted to make sure that we improved the learning experience and made things clear. So this is the first general step. So once you fill those out, you'd click next and you would get to the VM selection part. So this is similar to the wizard that exists today, but it has its own step. You can see the concerns impacting your VM. You can filter by things for your VM. And, you know, in this case, you have VMs with critical concerns, information. Something to point out is the layout looks pretty much the same as what you see today, where if you expand, you can see details around those concerns. But we did do some work to make the text around the concerns more clear and more actionable. So hopefully that would help someone who is migrating their VMs. And so let's say that I want to migrate virtual machine 1 and 2. I would select those, and then I would click next. And this is something else that we added, which is added validation around VMs. So we wanted to make sure that less migration plans failed, essentially. So if your VM has a critical concern impacting it, that would mean that if you don't fix it by the time you start the plan, your migration would very likely fail. So we just wanted to add an extra warning to make sure that users are aware of these things. And from here, you know, you can unselect your virtual machines, or you can confirm and move on, knowing that. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If you expand that caret,
yeah,
what does that show you? Does that show you the?
So I don't have it in the mock, but it basically shows you the same thing that you would see here. It would show you more details about the critical concerns that are impacting it, so you could then go in and do something about them.
Got it.
Yeah. And we also added this filter by critical concern. So for example, let's say you had more VMs and you wanted to see like, okay, I want to see all the VMs that are impacted by this one specific critical concern, and you want to then go and fix that. It would be more easier to parse through that information. But again, we still allow you to add these VMs to your plan. It's just that you would have to fix them before you start the plan. But it's just an added kind of guardrail or like warning to make sure the user is fully informed of what's happening.
Well, I like the way you phrased that at the beginning, which is like, we want more migrations to be successful. And
Exactly.
you know, part of that is just awareness that there are issues here and it's things that you need to address, and making sure that that information is upfront and in your face.
Exactly.
Us Linux folks sometimes make jokes about, you know, the Windows, like, are you sure? Are you really sure? You know, dialogues that you get and stuff like that. And while this may seem similar on the surface, right, it's just focused like on that top level critical information, because these are things that actually impact you, not just like confirming, are you sure you really want to smack your thumb with a hammer type of thing.
Right. Like if there are blockers, we want to inform you. And like you said, make it more in your face, especially if it's something you might miss. So, all right. For the purpose of this demo, I will just confirm the selections and move on. So the next step is picking a network map. So in the previous version, you had to select a network mapping from scratch every time that you created a migration plan. So we added this new feature of use an existing network map. So you can choose between selecting one that already exists, or you can choose to create a new one for that specific plan. And essentially, if you wanted to choose from an existing network map prior to creating a plan or during, you could go to the network maps page, and I don't have visuals for this, but you could go to the network map page and create a new ownerless network map, which means that it's not tied to any plan. So it becomes reusable. So you can reuse it over and over for different plans. And when you assign it to a plan, it basically creates a copy of it that is attached to that plan specifically, but the original map remains untouched and reusable. So in this case, if I were to use an existing network map, I'd essentially just select it, and I could either move on, or I could create a new network map. And this looks very similar to what exists today, where you would basically just select your source network and your target network. And then you could add a mapping if you wanted. And then you could also name this new network map that would be created when you create the plan.
And yeah, I guess I'd say, Sully, like I would hope that this would start to touch on what you mentioned earlier, as far as like previously you had to set up all those prerequisite objects like network map, storage map before you did this, whereas now, based on this new design, you can just create them in.
If you don't mind, Margot, I'm going to pause you for a second to answer Shubham's question here. So question is not about the user experience, but post copy in real production environments where VMs are as big as 256 or 512 gigabytes and writes to memory like crazy. So there is multiple different live migration strategies that you have available in order to help improve the chances for success with virtual machines that have very high amounts of memory and very high amounts of memory change or dirty pages. So I would say look at some of those alternative migration strategies. I don't have there's a documentation link that'll walk you through each one of them. I'll see if I can dig that up while Margot's talking and see if I can divide my attention enough to still pay attention. But definitely look at those, because that'll help you with various things. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but that'll help with various things like instead of just doing post copy, it will do, well, I'm just going to genericize and say other methods that are hopefully more successful without significantly extending the stun time required for the virtual machine. So let me see if I can find that link, and Margot, I'll hand back over to you.
All right, so the next step would be to define the storage map, and it's basically the same thing as define a network map. You have this new option to use an existing storage map. And again, you would go to the storage maps page and create that storage map that you could then reuse here. So let's say I make that selection. The next step would be selecting a migration type. And in the old wizard, you could not do this from the wizard itself. You had to create a plan, and then it was a setting that would come up later, but we thought that this was important enough to surface, so we added it as a step, and by default, it would default to cold migration, but you could do a warm migration if you wanted. The other thing that I wanted to note is, as you may have noticed, the wizard is divided by this basic setup section and then an additional setup section. And the basic setup section is basically all that is required that you fill out in order to create a plan, whereas the additional setup is all optional. So when you get to this migration type step, since you've already filled out all the required steps, you would see this new skip to review button that would basically bring you to the review where you could just create the plan and you wouldn't have to worry about the additional stuff if that didn't matter to you. But for the purpose of this demo, I will be showing you what those contain. So it essentially contains the settings that you would see when you create a plan. So they're not necessarily new settings. They existed before, except you would only find out about them after you created the plan. So again, this is just a way to surface them so that people are well informed about all the options that they have when it comes to creating their plan. And all of these are set to their defaults. And then another additional setting is the ability to add or to enable pre-migration or post-migration hooks. So you have that option here as well. And something I did want to know is, just if you don't touch them while you're creating the plan, you can still go and edit the settings when you create the plan. So it's not like it's a all or nothing, like you better do it now. You always have the option to edit it before you start your migration. But again, we just wanted to surface all the information available. And then the last step is that we added this review step, and this is just a nice way for people to be able to see all their selections in one go before they go ahead and create the plan. And they also have the option to go back and edit a step. So if you were to click on edit step, it would take you back to the step where you can make the edits. And then you would essentially create the plan, and it would create the plan. And I also wanted to note that it would not start the plan, it would just create it. And again, you could still go in and edit things about said plan before you start the migration. You also have the opportunity to address the concerns that may be concerning your VMs as you added them.
I just want to point out, and it seems so simple and so obvious, like having the edit button and having things be editable within the UI and the wizard, to me is a huge win. And I say that because so many things in OpenShift are like, we allow you to create them using the UI, but then when you edit them, it's just YAML. And so consistent experience, I think, is really, really important. And it's something that we're seeing more and more of, as I'm sure you all are to credit for in some way. So to me, that's a big one. Just simple things like that we often don't even really realize are happening.
Well, thank you for saying that. And yeah, we're definitely trying to make sure that things that exist in the YAML also have a UI equivalent. So I'm glad to hear that it is useful.
Yeah, occasionally I get asked by folks, I'll do a demo of OpenShift virtualization and like the managing a virtual machine interface, which is pretty robust and complete. And I'll get asked like, oh, well, can you do this in the API? And the answer is always, well, yes, the API, it's OpenShift and it's Kubernetes. The API always comes first. The UI is just a representation graphically of the API. There is no magic happening there.
Exactly right. Yeah, we know that people want to use GitOps to accomplish some of these tasks, but we always hope that the UI could, if you're going to move into that world, maybe you use the UI initially to set things up or build the YAML or just as a starting point. So we always have that use case in our minds as well.
Yeah, for anybody who's not familiar with ACM does that in their UI. There's always the toggle button for YAML, where you can, at any point in time, click the button and you can see exactly the YAML that it's generating as you go through the wizard, which is I find to be useful because I infrequently create ACM objects.
For sure, yeah.
All right, well, that concludes the wizard demo. I just want to know if there were any questions before I move on.
I don't have any questions. Nothing I haven't interrupted you to ask already, but I'll just remind the audience, feel free to ask any questions that come to mind or provide any feedback as well. So Peter, I wanted to ask you, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, about the process for these things and how this works. Is like Margot said, like these are mock-ups at this point, what she's been showing through here. So I know that this process it's not overnight. It's not like you all like go out and talk to some folks and then you make some recommendations and suddenly it's all in the product. There is a process for how this happens. And so I know some of this is in the UI already. Some of it is on the roadmap. Some of it we're still working on and trying to figure out and stuff like that. So
That's a great point and probably something we should have said already. But Margot, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe everything you've shown here will be in MTV 2.9, which I believe is shipping maybe today. that could be
Supposedly
the case.
today. Yeah, supposed to be.
So this is what you're seeing here. This will be live and available in the products seemingly as of today. So that wasn't planned to have us on today, but that kind of worked out.
And just to touch on the process part, I mean, like Peter kind of touched on before, we tried our best to talk to customers and really base our designs on feedback that we've gotten and on pain points that we've gotten. And then, we go off and try to design something, and then ideally, and we did this in this case, we try to share those designs and get even more feedback and then reiterate and try to really get to the crux of the problem and like make sure that we're solving the user needs. So we tried to do our best with this in this case.
Yeah. And I know listening to Yahoos like me is one thing, hearing from customers and our field folks, whether that be, SAs, SSAs, or consultants, but especially customers, right? The people who are out there using these things and giving us feedback is really important. But I'll also point out, I know you guys get data from a lot of other areas as well, like support cases and just various other things in order to help identify, like you said, Margot, where are those pain points? What are the things that are causing folks issues and problems, and how can we help alleviate that?
That's right. Yeah, I'll make a plug. You mentioned support cases, but we have a great UX research team which supports us, and they've been using AI. We've created a Notebook LM instance that can pull from support case data, as well as the existing research that our wonderful research team has already done in these areas, and now pull insights out of that, which we've been applying to our various products. So kudos to our research team. We couldn't do it without them, and just wanted to mention how we're using AI to do some of this. I'll also mention, so Margot touched on how we discover some of these things. We certainly talk to customers, all that data that I just mentioned, but we certainly work hand in hand as far as process with our product managers. There's certainly the business side of this, as well as engineering. Engineering are oftentimes the ones building these things. Our team does have a couple of UI engineers, which actually have directly contributed to what you're seeing here. But certainly it's a close relationship with those three groups, basically UX, product management, engineering, working tightly. That's how we sort of plan for what we're going to focus on next, determine the timing of it, like what can we get in this release versus the next release, based on the resources we have to implement it. But that's a little bit more about the process that I just wanted to say.
Yeah, that's a really good one to point out, of like the UX team, you all are working to identify those problems and take your knowledge and expertise, which is not necessarily like implementation, product functionality expertise, and apply that to the user experience. How do we help the users understand, use, get the most out of it? And then product management are the ones who help prioritize that against the roadmap and ultimately, again, customer impact. There's a long running joke about how like sales folks are often quote unquote coin operated, right? However they're best incentivized to make money is the things that they will go out and sell. Product managers are very similar rather, in that product management and the features that they prioritize are influenced by revenue. The more impact, the more customers impacted, and the more demand that there is for it, the higher that priority becomes, and therefore the faster it gets implemented. And then, of course, as you said, engineering are the ones who are actually going in and oftentimes implementing many of these things, because they're the people who understand the code and how to make that happen.
That's right. And I mentioned it kind of in passing there, but so engineering, we certainly have a lot of priorities that we need to focus on. Like at any given time, there's new features that need to make their way into MTV, for example, which can use up almost the entire engineering bandwidth for a release. So our team does actually have engineering group associated with it. We have UXD engineering. Two of those engineers are actually embedded in the MTV product space. So they're able to push in new features like this that are pure like UX enhancements that otherwise might not be able to be prioritized just based on team bandwidth. So I did want to mention that too, since that's been fantastic in the MTV product space in particular.
Yeah, that's very cool. I didn't know that. Manet Kantan, Had issues trying to convert OVF, OVA files for migration. Any updates on that? I do not have any updates on that. So I've asked the question internally. I haven't gotten a response back. So I know that there has been ongoing work and effort in order to make that process easier and more compatible, but I don't have any specific updates there. So Margot, I think, so you had finished with this set of the create migration plan wizard.
Yes, I have more to show. So I guess I'll keep going. So the next thing is updates to the overview page. So Ethan did some great work on this. Peter showed the current overview page earlier, but essentially we got some feedback that it wasn't really enough to get a good grasp of everything that was going on with their MTV migration plans. So we did some work to try and make it, more informative and more of a place where people can see everything at a glance. So the first thing to note is this welcome section, which shows you all the providers that you can migrate from. And if you clicked on one of these, it would take you to the providers page where you could go and create a provider right away. So that's pretty neat. And then we have more of like a charting layout, which we didn't have before, which again allows you to see progress on your migration plans at a glance. So here you can see your migration progress. So the color scheme is the same throughout all these charts, but if it's blue, it's succeeded. If it's light blue, it's running. And if it's red, it's failed. Then you have this migration history chart where you can see things over time, which is neat. And you can even hover over and get information. And another neat feature is that if you click on this, it takes you to that plan information. So there's some continuity between the pages, which is nice. And then you can also see your migration plans at a glance. Again, you can filter by time frame that you want to look at. And then we have a general MTV health section here, which I believe existed in the past overview and we wanted to retain. So again, it was just, we wanted it to be a more visual way to look at your plan progress and a way for people to look and see a general success or failures or whatever else they want to look at a glance. And then the tabs up here remain essentially the same. And we moved the settings section, which used to be in the overview, to its own page where you can just edit everything at once, which is also pretty neat.
I really like this, and I say that because, like, in my mind, I immediately jump to the migration framework. Because in case you don't know, for the audience, or maybe Peter and Margot, so we have this thing called the virtualization migration assessment, which is a services engagement where Red Hat comes out and we sit down with your virtualization team and kind of go through and look at the inventory of things and make an assessment of how fast and how long it will take and how quickly we can move virtual machines from source to OpenShift virtualization. And the second part of that is the virtualization migration framework, which is basically our consulting folks or services folks take Ansible and wrap MTV in an Ansible workbook or series of workbooks to do all of these migrations. So that way it's not some poor guy like me who's sitting there like, let me create a new migration plan, let me select the VMs, click next, finish, and then go. Instead, it's all driven through Ansible because it's just API objects in the background. I love that this shows all of those things because it's still MTV that's doing the actual migrations in the background. So we can see all of those migrations that are happening, the success and failure. We can correlate all of the things that are happening inside of there. So when I have thousands or tens of thousands of virtual machines to move, we can make that happen. And I know having worked closely with some of the consulting folks over there, services folks, like they're working with multiple customers who are moving hundreds and hundreds of virtual machines a day. So having this high level overview is really cool. Khalil has a question here. I don't know if this is a Peter or Margot question. Are there any specific accessibility guidelines or standards that the team prioritizes when designing and developing a user interface?
I could take a stab at that if that's okay, Margot.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so we mentioned it earlier, but all of Red Hat products are built on our design system, Patternfly, which we have a wonderful team of designers and developers purely focused on building Patternfly, which is open source. So anybody could use it to build their product. But that's what all of Red Hat products are, or generally all of Red Hat products are built on. And the Patternfly team certainly prioritizes accessibility. It's built into the components that are being created, so that when you construct a UI using them, it should be easily readable with a screen reader. Also for low vision, no vision, we have high contrast themes. I was just checking the Patternfly website, and we're generally always targeting the WCAG 2.1 level AA, basically for accessibility. There is a link, Sully, I put it in our chat. I don't know if you would be able to put it in the public chat, but that gives you more information on Patternfly's accessibility. I don't know if there's anything else, Margot, that I missed that you want to expand on.
No, honestly, you covered it perfectly. I worked in Patternfly for a long time at the beginning of my time at Red Hat, and it's a consideration in everything that we do when we're building out the design system. So things like what he said, colors, like making sure that we're not just relying on colors, for example, but also having labels if that's going to be the case. It's always at the forefront of our designs when we're thinking and building out the design system.
Am I remembering correctly that we have some certifications or something that we also adhere to? I want to say there's like some ISO standards or something like that here in the US that we test against. That might be an Ali question, Ali Moblem.
I don't know if that is part of WCAG. I'm honestly not sure.
Okay.
I only know about that also. Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've seen this question come up on various RFI, RFE type of questionnaires before, and I want to say that like there is a more robust, like I want to say certification that we go through for many of these things, for specifically accessibility, not just multi-language support and stuff like that. But maybe I'm misremembering.
I think you probably have it right, because if I'm being honest with you, I'm Googling it right now, and I see that the ISO 40500 standard, it says is exactly the same as WCAG 2.0. So if I'm being honest with you, this is stuff I didn't already know, but I do know that we're actively trying to meet that, because I believe many public sector contracts need that to be able to use the product. So we are definitely covering that.
Yeah.
All right. I will move on to the last thing, if that's okay, which is monitoring experience updates. So essentially, when you go to start your plans, or actually when you look at your migration plans page, you can see the status of all your plans at a glance. And I will bring your attention to these two columns specifically, are things that we updated. So the first thing is adding what migration type each plan is, so you can see it at a glance. And then the other bigger update, which I think is great, is this migration status column. So in the previous version, it used to be kind of a progress bar, and it wasn't very explicit. It didn't necessarily show you the breakdown of the status of each VM within the plan. Some of the labels were a bit unclear and misleading. And so Ethan did a lot of work to create new labels that are more clear, and then also give you a breakdown of the VMs in your plan. So for example, in this plan, there are 9 virtual machines. You can see that the status is that it's still migrating or in the process of migrating, and you can see that 5 of the VMs have successfully migrated and 4 are in progress. And if you hover over them, you can see the name of the VMs and details concerning them. So yeah, we just want to highlight that. You can also filter on all of these things, which is great. So you can see everything at a glance. It's a lot more clear than what used to exist. And hopefully that'll help people manage their migration plans. And the other thing that I wanted to note is when you click into your migration plan, you can see all the VMs that are migrating. So this is what that looks like. And here you can see again all the list of your VMs. And in this case, you can expand each VM to see more information about the progress of your VM. So we also did a revamp of this section to be more clear. We moved this migration progress information higher up, since that is honestly the key information that users are looking to see. And we also did some work on clarifying what each step is and adding a little bit more description for each step. And then we have other pertinent things to your VMs under this migration resources expansion. But I just wanted to point these out as other improvements that we made for clarity and for better understanding of what's going on with your migration, what the status of it is. And that concludes the demo part. I just wanted to mention 2 more features that are coming, and that is the ability to do raw copy mode. So that'll be a setting in your migration plans, and also a storage offload capability, which will be in tech preview. And essentially that will allow migration speeds to be significantly increased. And basically it works by migrating customer storage using vSphere's Xcopy when available. So that will be something that's available in tech preview, and when used can dramatically reduce migration speeds. So I just wanted to flag those as well. But that's it for my demo section.
Awesome, thank you, Margot. So I was just responding to the question here from SOC Hawkage about how often are the live streams, and excited for the security stream, which me too. Security is always an important topic. So the live streams, we try and do these every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. We try and keep that time consistent, even though, yes, we know it jumps around as a result of daylight savings time and stuff like that. So I say we try and do them every week. Sometimes we do get interrupted. So like we'll skip weeks that Red Hat Summit or KubeCon. If there's US holidays that tend to fall, because both Jonny and I are US based, that tend to fall in the middle of the week, then we might skip that week depending on, like last week I was on PTO. And then other times we just have things that just get in the way. For example, Jonny's not here today because life happens. So we do try our best to be here every Wednesday, but it is an imperfect world, so it doesn't always happen. That being said, on the topic of security, we don't have anything, a specific date scheduled yet. However, we know that there are several topics that we want to cover with regard to security. If you look at the what's new topics for the last couple of releases, there's been a huge number of security things that have happened inside of there that we definitely want to cover. There's also things like there was an OpenShift virtualization hardening guide that was released recently that I'd love to get the folks who contributed to that on and talk through a number of these things. I'll see if I can dig up a link to that here in a moment. But yeah, security is one of those things that it is throughout and central to so many different aspects that it's an ongoing and ever-present topic. So,
and I can't, because I'm here right now, I would plug that the UX team, as I said at the beginning of this call, we're focused on all of OpenShift, the OpenShift experience, including security. We have several designers focused specifically on the advanced cluster security product. They're doing a lot of work around integrating that product further with Advanced Cluster Manager, ACM, also how we manage security of VMs, so maybe that's relevant. But we'd love to bring them on this call too, if that ever worked out.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the, here we go. Let's see if I can find the right link to that virtualization hardening guide, because I think that that's a pretty important one to get out there. Come on, internet, you can do it. Anyways, Margot, thank you so much for doing the demo and showcasing all of the things that are happening in MTV. As Peter said, I think all of this got included in OpenShift, or excuse me, Migration Toolkit for Virtualization 2.9, which, so far as I know, as of Monday, which was the last time I heard about it, it was due to be released today. So hopefully that is available now, or will be very shortly. It's always interesting to me to see the release process behind the scenes. Like OpenShift releases take something like 16 hours to happen fully, like as they go through and build all the assets and test them and validate them and then push them out to all of the mirrors and everything else. So I don't know if the same is true of components or layered products is what they're often referred to, but it's always interesting to me to see just how long and how long that process takes, even though it seems relatively simple. Oh yeah, just shove some files up there and we're good. With that in mind, so Margot, Peter, do you have anything else that you want to add there?
I guess just I thank you, Sully, for once again having the UX team on the stream. We love coming. I'd say today we basically exclusively covered migration topics for virtualization, but we'd happily come back, and we're doing a ton of day 2 work as far as for VM management, including multi-cluster VM management, certainly areas we're focusing on. The core OpenShift experience, we're certainly still focused on doing a lot of work around the operator lifecycle manager. There's a new version of that API being released that'll maybe simplify some of those resources. Perhaps updating that catalog in the OpenShift cluster as well. We'd love to come back and show that. And I've already plugged the advanced cluster security team. We'd love to show some of that work as well. So maybe I'll just plant that in your ear now, Sully, if that would ever work out.
You all are always welcome.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Love coming.
Well, I can find a link to the hardening guide that is published internally. I cannot find the external link. So we'll have to follow up on that one and get that link out next week. So with that being said, the only thing that I've got to close out on is some reminders about upcoming events. So in particular, where did my slide go? Let's see, I want to share my screen. And I want to share this particular set of slides. So just a quick reminder that OpenShift Commons is always co-located with not only Red Hat Summit, but also the KubeCons. So if you are interested in participating in OpenShift Commons, that is happening alongside of KubeCon in Atlanta in November this year, please make sure to submit any papers that you would like to have inside of there or presentations by August 18th. So I know they're always looking for folks to come and present and talk about the things that you all are doing, right? Commons is our user group. It is the folks that right, we want to know and we care about what you are doing with the product, not necessarily just the things that we're always, preaching about and talking about here on places like the live stream. I'll also remind you that the OpenShift Superhero nominations are open. So I saw Our Hope 9 in the chat here just a moment ago. So Our Hope 9 is one of the inaugural winners of the OpenShift Superhero Cape. We just had another round of those winners that happened at Summit. So anybody that you are wanting to recognize for Builder, Advocate, or Ambassador, please don't hesitate to nominate those folks. And I will point out that this is, again, it is a community award. So it is not for Red Hat folks like myself, Peter, and Margot, or Jonny. Although we do appreciate when we get nominations, it is very much an award and a recognition for all of the awesome things that you all, our community, are doing. So please, please, please go ahead and submit those folks over. You can see the quick link there in the upper right-hand corner, red.ht/superhero. And then I don't remember if they gave me another slide or not. Nope. Appears the marketing folks just gave me those 2 slides as reminders for the upcoming events. I'll note that the superhero nominations, they don't need to be in as early as the CFP proposals. So CFP is August 18th superhero nominations. You can typically nominate those for, I think it's up until about a month or so beforehand. It depends on various things on their side. So keep an eye out for that. And then, of course, as always, we try our best to recognize folks for those here on the live stream as well. So with that being said, let's stop screen sharing. I want to thank both Margot and Peter for joining us today. As always, y'all are awesome to have on. It's always interesting to me to see and understand both the process that's happening as well as just the amazing improvements that y'all bring. Like I said before, like there's nothing wrong with the kind of default UIs that we tend to create, because again, we're engineering driven folks, but not everybody is that way. And not only is that okay, like that's amazing. We want to improve, we want to make these things better. So y'all are always welcome. Whether you want to talk about MTV or virtualization or anything OpenShift related or any of those things, we love it. And for the audience, please don't hesitate. If you have thoughts or feedback on any of our user experiences, send them to me, send them to Jonny. We will make sure that the team gets all of that feedback. And I know I'm kind of I regularly funnel people over to Peter and team, and they love to reach out and have conversations with folks. So if you or your team are experiencing issues and you have like, hey, it would be great if this worked better, or if it functioned this way, or if it looked this way, I know that they love to collect that feedback. And it may not end up looking like that, but the input is important. As we love to say here in Red Hat, feedback is a gift.
100%. Yeah, we spend a lot of our time looking for customers that are willing to give us feedback, users that are willing to give us feedback. So yeah, to restate it, what Sully just said, if anybody has any thoughts or feedback on anything around the OpenShift experience or any Red Hat product, we'll get you in touch with the right UX team that covers it, and we'd love to get that feedback. So thanks for saying that, Sully.
Absolutely, I'm always happy to send folks your way. So I don't know what next week's topic is going to be at this point. I also don't know if Jonny is going to be here next week, so he and I will have to chat on the side and figure out what's going on. That being said, we will do our best to be here on the stream next week. I know we've got a couple of different things lined up. I usually rely on Jonny to tell me the calendar of folks that are coming on, so I'll have to check with him and find out what that looks like. But do keep an eye out for us here every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And with that, just one last reminder, if you have any questions, if anything comes up, if you're watching us not live, if you're watching the stream after fact, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me at sully@redhat.com, SULLY@redhat.com. And with that, I will see everybody next week. Thanks again,
so
Margot
much.
and Peter.